I want to welcome everyone to tonight's Fireside Chat with Lyndon LaRouche for Thursday, April 7th, 2022. And as you undoubtedly, hopefully are aware, we're all preparing for a conference that we're having, the Schiller Institute is having, this coming Saturday starting at 9 a.m. for a conference to establish a new security and development architecture for all nations. I am going to indicate who is speaking on the first panel, just to give a sense of why you will want to be there at 9 a.m. and why you should do everything in your power to alert persons via text, Twitter, email, phone call, and in some cases face-to-face meetings for why they ought to be with this at this meeting. The plenary session begins with Helga LaRouche, founder of the Schiller Institute. The need for a new paradigm is her topic. She will be followed by Ambassador Anatoly Antonov, that is the ambassador of the Russian Federation to the United States, prospects for building a new international security architecture. He will be followed by Sam Petroda, who is called an innovator, an entrepreneur, and policymaker for U.S.-India. And his topic is the need to redesign the world. He will be followed by Jay Naidu. He was a cabinet member in South Africa under President Nelson Mandela, and he will be speaking on what is called the African perspective. They will be followed by Chen Xiaohan, Chinese People's Association for Peace and Disarmament, the Shared Future of Mankind, Alessia Ruggieri, spokeswoman of the Comitato per la Repubblica, a trade unionist from Italy, for Europe of the Fatherlands with the Peace of Westphalia, and finally by P.S. Raghavan, former Indian ambassador to Russia, the Indian perspective. All right, so that's going to be the first panel, which begins at 9 a.m. And then you can take a look. If you go to the Schiller Institute website, you get a sense of the other panels. Clearly, if you've been following any of what is called the news, you know why this conference has become critical. We do have well over 1,000 people converging upon 2,000 people that have registered for the conference. We would urge that you would get in on the action and get people to do the same. And there are various tasks that we still have to perform before we get to the conference. First of all, I just want to emphasize that we absolutely, all of the various features of the LaRouche organization need financial support, need income, and that will help in general in the process of organizing that we've undertaken. Secondly, more importantly, getting to people and having them place the news about this conference on respective platforms such that it radiates from different and unexpected corners, such that it can converge upon pinpointing for people the reason or the necessity for participating in this forum, which is above the fray, operating above the fray of the conflict. And then thirdly, the idea of particularly involving young people, people who, for example, would have been born at or just before 9/11, for whom many of the actual underlying features of the present set of conflicts going on globally would not be obvious. Some have noted the recent return to the White House of President Barack Obama, former President Barack Obama, who's acting as though he's acting President Barack Obama. In one sense, that may be exactly what's going on. People noted the seemingly completely distracted and also despised and rejected way in which the entourage, the assembly, treated Biden in Obama's presence. And so that sort of should say something, not even so much about Obama, but more something about the true state of the American Republic and what is called the democratic form of government, which has been superseded and usurped with the kind of circumstance in which a former president may, in fact, be in various ways acting as acting president, where the circumstances seem to be one of full-scale crisis in the executive branch, but it's unacknowledged. So with that said, tonight what we want to do is to just say a few things about where we stand as a whole, and then we'll get to discuss some elements of the organizing process as time permits. So with us we have tonight Diane Sare. She's going to get us started. So Diane, you now have the floor.
Okay. Well, I'll just say that unfortunately I think most Americans, while very much aware that the Biden administration is a terrible disaster and also very worried, I think many people actually are worried about the risk of thermonuclear war. What people are not aware of is how we are seen in the United States by the rest of the world, and that there is simultaneously the potential for an entirely new paradigm to come into being. And in a sense, this conference is really very much part of that potential new dynamic. But there has been talk, as people who are listening to, the various programs of the LaRouche organization on Saturday and Thursday, that the Eurasian Economic Union, led now by Sergei Glaziev, who was a great admirer of Lyndon LaRouche, of creating an entirely new economic system with currencies pegged to gold or other precious metals, in effect fixed exchange rates, and a real win-win kind of relationship. And that these nations, if you take Russia, China, India, you already have 38% of the world's population. If you add the 115 nations that are currently part of the Belt and Road Initiative, and I haven't looked at this, so I can't tell you exactly what it adds up to, but I suspect you are well over 50% of the world's population that is leaving the sinking ship. And I would also say that the conditions of the United States are not unknown to people. We had a rally in front of Federal Hall the other day, and someone came up to me and said, yeah, the United States, how can it call itself a nation when it doesn't provide people health care? Now, I don't think that's exactly the definition of a nation, but it does say in our Constitution to defend the principle of the general welfare. We saw during the pandemic that somehow there seemed to be an ability to make sure that everybody got tested, got vaccinated, got treated, perhaps not in the best possible way. But in other words, what you see is there's actually no reason why every person in the United States could not be guaranteed a very high standard of health care, but there's not a commitment to do that because we've had a commitment to bailing out a bunch of criminal speculators, and I mean for trillions and trillions of dollars. It recently has been revealed, because apparently it's part of the Dodd-Frank Act, that the Federal Reserve has to report at least every 2 years, or they have to do a 2-year report on everything they did in the previous 2 years. So the full extent of the crisis of 2019, when the banks decided they no longer dared to lend to each other overnight and the Fed had to step in, was $28 trillion of loans, and 63% of that went to only 6 of the major banks. So there's plenty of quote-unquote money, but the question is, what's your intent as a nation? Is your priority the well-being of your people, or is your priority something else? So people know that. People have traveled here. They know what New York City looks like. They know that if you take the subway in Manhattan, you are putting your life on the line because of the number of people who are mentally ill, on drugs, and otherwise have no place to go who are in the subways. And that doesn't seem to be a pressing concern. So people are aware of what's happening in the United States, and then they see our president pointing his finger at Biden, pointing his finger at Xi Jinping, and accusing them of monstrous human rights violations when we have a nation where over 1 million people, I think we crossed that threshold, is that right, died of COVID. It was 900,000. I think it went over 1 million. We don't really know how many people died because of how badly the pandemic was handled, because of depression and despair, of the isolation, the depression and despair related to their businesses closing, and all of the other factors which are ignored. So it's really important to recognize, because it's a challenge for most of us in the United States, because when many of us were young, we would look around the world, and when you think of Afghanistan or you think of Nigeria or Ethiopia, you think of countries where people are sitting around scratching in the dirt. They don't have high-rise buildings or electricity, and actually this mental image that people have of the world is completely wrong. It's out of date. We are collapsing. We are disintegrating. The standard of living here is plummeting. Life expectancy is collapsing, and the rest of the world knows it. So that is one reason why you would not side with the United States and Western Europe, which is perhaps in some ways even more insane than we are, if you knew what was going on in the rest of the world. If you knew that China had built 57,000 kilometers of high-speed rail and lifted 850 million people out of poverty and was building the longest bridge, the greatest water project, modern ports, modern rail in nations, Nigeria is going to have high-speed rail before the United States. So it's a very different world. However, we still have nuclear weapons, and apparently we have people in our military, like the head of the Strategic Command, Admiral Richard, who would be willing to use these things. We have meetings going on where it's being mooted that the United States is going to change from our no first use doctrine. So that has to put us on alert. Now, we heard today that President Putin in Russia has been accused of being a war criminal, of violating human rights. And as in the case of Iraq and Syria, no one feels obligated to actually produce any hard evidence that this is the fact. They show us photographs of supposed corpses in Bucha, and there are some photographs of corpses in Bucha, and there are some photographs that are not corpses because they're still moving. And they assert that this was done by the Russians. And when the Russians prove by a timeline of events that this could not be true, they are not allowed to present this. In fact, they are refused their request in a very unprecedented, unusual way to address the UN Security Council, instead being told that the council will meet when President Zelensky of Ukraine is available to speak there. So they voted Russia off of the UN Human Rights Commission, which in one sense you could argue is not such a great humiliation or hasn't been that committed to human rights, given that at one point not that long ago Saudi Arabia was the head of the UN Human Rights Commission, and their government was not only implicated in the 9/11 attacks on the United States, but also is known for annually chopping people's heads off in the town square for their crimes. So, what does this mean really, accepting that you have a few nations who are arrogantly insane? Now, I wanted to say something about Bucha because I know people trying to organize will be confronted with this. And I happened to hear an interview that Scott Ritter, former Marine veteran, former UN weapons inspector, also who spent, I think, 10 years in the Soviet Union at one point. I forget what he said he was doing there. Helping to get rid of various of the weapons at that time. And he saw video images from Bucha of corpses and so on. And he said, first of all, the story that you're hearing about these corpses having been there, the film was taken, I think, April 1st or 2nd, having been there since March 19th. He said, that's a total fraud. I've seen corpses that are 2 and 3 weeks old. They don't look like this. And I won't go through how they described them to appear because it's quite gruesome and horrible, but it's not like somebody sleeping or somebody recently dead. Then he pointed out in the pictures that you could see that they were holding packages, I think green packages with a white star or some kind of insignia, which indicates that these are packages that were being handed out by the Russian army with food and supplies. They were humanitarian aid kits. So the people that were killed had recently received packages of aid from the Russians. So that doesn't really make too much sense. He said further, you could see many of them had a white armband, which apparently is the signal or symbol for someone in Ukraine who wants to surrender, who wants to be granted safe passage to get out of Ukraine, that doesn't want to fight with the Nazi battalions and is asking the Russians to be able to leave. So these are the people who were killed. So why would Russians be killing people who were coming to them for aid? Doesn't make any sense. He said what you will never hear on CNN is the recording of one of the commanders, the military commanders there, who apparently even took to the social media to tell everybody in Bucha to please stay inside and don't interfere. We are going to be cleansing the area. What did they mean by that? They meant killing anybody with sympathies to work with the Russians. So there was an announcement by the Ukrainian military, Ukrainian Azov battalion, perhaps police force, that they were going to do, in effect, an ethnic cleansing, killing anybody who might have been sympathetic to the Russians. So he said all of this is covered up. All of what was done was therefore war crimes. You have videos of people coming out of vans and having their legs broken. He said it is the war. There are conventions, not just the Geneva Convention, but just certain rules of engagement and conduct. He said if your enemy is injured, not in the middle of fire where you could be yourself injured, but if your enemy is disarmed, injured, unable to hurt you, you are obligated to help that person. You are obligated to provide medical care. And if you don't, then that is a war crime. So he said you do have war crimes. The war crimes are being committed by the Nazis in Ukraine, and that President Biden has become a war criminal for countenancing this, defending this, arming this. Zelensky is a war criminal, and he said Putin is not a war criminal because there is no evidence that anything that he has done thus far is in violation of these codes. So I wanted to go through that in a little bit of detail because I think it's just very important to keep this in mind and how wildly far off what we're being told is. So also Lavrov, the foreign minister, said that apparently in the March 29th meetings in Istanbul that the Ukrainians finally put into writing some of that they are beginning to agree to certain measures, that Ukraine would be neutral, that they will not allow foreign forces to fight in Ukraine, unless it is agreed by the parties that will become the guarantors of Ukraine's security, which would be the Russian Federation and the European Union, and perhaps the United States, but some security agreement, including the Russian Federation, which agrees to become part of protecting the sovereignty of Ukraine. They have not yet agreed to the necessity of denazification and so on, but there was actual progress. So Lavrov said perhaps all of this explosion of accusing Russia of war crimes is to ensure that the war continues to disrupt the peace talks, because if people heard Biden's speech in Poland, it's clear that the intention from Biden, he said, we're going to cut Russia's economy in half over the years. Well, if the sanctions and the economic warfare are supposedly because of Putin's quote-unquote invasion of Ukraine, and you're saying you're going to be doing this for years, then I guess that means that this fighting in Ukraine has to continue for years, which is a pretty sick idea, and I don't think it will last that long because I don't think the Russians are going to put up with that. So it's a pretty wild situation. Also, the fact that Scott Ritter just won a fight to have his Twitter account restored, I think indicates we are getting very close to a break point, because people do have cameras on their phones and they do have a way to get evidence out, and the truth is coming out, and it's becoming harder and harder to suppress. And even the Pentagon, there's clearly some people there who recognize the insanity and the danger of hyping up Americans. Oh, there's war crimes. Oh, we should send in troops. We should have troops on the ground to fight that evil Putin. This kind of insanity. The Pentagon actually came forward shortly after all the hype in the press and said, well, actually, we cannot confirm. Hello, someone's unmuted, humming. We cannot confirm the story about the war crimes in Bucha. So it is an unbelievably fluid situation. It is the height of an unstable point. And our conference in this context will resonate and be amplified orders of magnitude more than at any other time. And the fact that we have these people, including emphatically the ambassador of the Russian Federation, coming together as led by Helga LaRouche in terms of the solution, I think will have greater power than many of us imagine right now. So that's what I have.
Okay, very good. So we're going to open up for a question. What you have to do to get into the queue is press *6 to get into the queue, and then we'll see where we are. And I'd like people to sort of hurry in to get to a few things. I'll say a couple of things just about not what Diane said. That's straightforward. But what we are looking at, we have to think about this, is that while people are being diverted in a certain direction, let's keep in mind that so far as you know or I know, nothing has been done in Afghanistan to address the situation of tens of millions of people starving to death and otherwise dying because of inclement conditions. Not to mention the effect and impact that will have on the spread of various diseases, including coronavirus. The second element is to recognize what is happening with food and food production, because of the fact that although the United States does not get, for example, the majority of its food from Russia, that's not true for a place like Egypt or other countries. And so what you have going on, whether people are admitting it or not, is that the sanctions implementation is actually going to end up killing more people than the war in Ukraine. The third thing to know is that various persons, many of them associated with the military and State Department, are talking about the war in Ukraine going on for months or years. And so there's something else afoot here, which in the course of people blindly stating that they support this, sort of the same exact thing that was done with respect to Iraq. and with respect to what became the Patriot Act also in 2001. So there's a process underway of distraction, but that process has a correlate. This is not Saddam Hussein. This is not Muammar Gaddafi. This is the world's probably leading nuclear power from the standpoint of innovation in technologies, and in any case, the second leading nuclear power from the standpoint of total number of nuclear weapons. And that does come into play. This is not Saddam Hussein's Iraq. At the point that the Russians think that they are facing an existential circumstance, and that is the point at which you begin to make incursions toward their border, thermonuclear war as a full, total factor comes into play. There's no way, there's nothing about what Americans think about that. There's nothing to do with the American sensibility. There's nothing to do with the American cultural outlook. It has nothing to do with the notion of what people find to be reasonable and unreasonable in the United States or any other country in the transatlantic. And that is our biggest problem. Anybody who has a sort of a team mentality should be immediately sacked from any position of authority or responsibility in the present circumstance. Anybody that has an addiction to sports, which translates into their thinking in general about policy, should be sacked immediately because they represent a security threat both to themselves and to the nation. So just wanted to insert that. We have people in the queue who are going to go right to questions.